It's finally happening. After an excruciating 19-month wait that has been wrought with frustration, Ukraine is finally set to receive a huge batch of tanks that could prove to be game changers in its war against Russia. Leopard 1A5s are finally on their way, and they're arriving en masse. It's taken Ukraine and its Western partners a long time to get to this point. For most of the war, Russia has managed to maintain a massive numbers advantage when it comes to tanks. Ukraine has bravely defended itself, using everything from clever armored vehicle assaults to javelin missiles to decimate Russia's tank stocks. But the Russian heavy machinery kept on coming, and Ukraine found itself at a clear disadvantage on the ground. That's all about to change. The arrival of this huge batch of Leopard 1A5s won't mean that Ukraine suddenly has more tanks on the field than Russia, not even close. But it does mean that Ukraine now has a lot of very capable tanks that it can use to crush Russian forces. But there are questions. Just how many Leopards is Ukraine set to receive? Why did it take so long to get them? And why will this agile tank be such a game changer for Ukraine? Those are the questions we'll answer in this video, starting with the most important: just how many Leopard 1A5s are arriving in Ukraine? The simple answer is at least 155. However, if the Ukraine war has taught us anything, it's that nothing is really simple. Around 2 years ago, a 3-country consortium, including Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, the latter being the leader of the three, pledged the 155 Leopards to Ukraine. Between the date that pledge was made and September 2024, only 58 of the 155 had arrived. Why? Parts shortages and technical issues massively delayed the arrival of these powerful tanks, and we'll dig into the reason why in a few moments, but the consortium has finally managed to pick up the pace. Between September and December 2024, the 3 countries managed to ship an additional 45 tanks, almost equaling the amount it had sent during the previous 2 years in just 4 months. Ukraine will be very happy about this ramped-up delivery schedule. As Forbes reports, the Leopard 1A5 will become the most numerous Western tank it has in its arsenal. Once all of the 155 arrive, it'll stack up well with the 104 more modern Leopard 2 tanks Ukraine has, as well as easily dwarfing the American M1s and 14 British Challenger 2s Ukraine has received from its Western allies. The most recent Leopard 1A5 shipment was announced on December 23rd, with Ukraine set to receive another 22 of the tanks. They'll arrive alongside a host of other weapons, including German-made artillery, air defense units, and armored trucks as part of the 11 billion euros, or about $11.33 billion in military aid that Germany has sent to Ukraine in 2024 to combat Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion. Still, it's taken more than 19 months for these tanks to start arriving in big numbers. That leads us to an obvious question: why? The answer is more than a little embarrassing for Germany. Back in September 2023, not long after the German-led consortium pledged its 155 Leopard 1A5s, Ukraine was forced to reject the first batch of tanks that Germany tried to send. The Leopards were riddled with technical problems that Ukraine's engineers simply didn't have the training or skills to fix themselves. Some of those problems were the result of general wear and tear, which were made more problematic by the fact that the parts needed to fix the tanks were in short supply. This wasn't the first time Ukraine was forced to reject German-made Leopard tanks. Previously, Berlin had sent an advance guard of 10 tanks to Ukraine, only for Kyiv to determine that they were unsuitable for deployment in their current state. Bear in mind that Ukraine was at that point desperate for any armored units that it could use to break through the defensive lines Russia had created to fend off Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive. The fact that Ukraine wouldn't use these tanks, despite that desperation, tells you all you need to know about the state of that initial batch of Leopard 1A5s. And Germany's engineers agreed. After getting the tanks back from Ukraine, Germany conducted its own inspections and concluded that further work was needed on the tanks to make them suitable for active service. Several media outlets, including the UK's Spectator magazine, speculated that these issues could spell the end of the Leopard in Ukraine. The magazine asked whether German tank design and construction have become too complex and sophisticated for their own good, while also questioning whether Ukraine's personnel was skilled enough to even operate the tank. Of course, we now know the answer to that second question. Ukraine's soldiers have shown themselves to be more than capable of operating the more advanced Leopard 2 tanks they've received from Germany in the months since these failed Leopard 1A5 deliveries. The problem wasn't with Ukraine, it was with the German tanks. So how did Germany and its consortium partners respond? Rather than giving up on the idea of sending dozens of Leopard 1A5s to Ukraine, Germany got to work on fixing the problematic tanks, which it had tried to do once before. In August 2023, Germany's main weapons manufacturer Rheinmetall was engaged to refurbish the tanks Berlin aimed to donate. Those refurbishments clearly weren't good enough. A lack of spare parts for the tanks means that the vehicles, which were manufactured in the 1980s, simply couldn't be brought up to standard quickly enough. Germany has thus spent around 19 months sourcing those spare parts, which allowed them to bring the Leopard 1A5s up to a standard that makes them deployable on the front lines. Furthermore, Rheinmetall has created a repair facility within Ukraine to enable rapid refurbishment of the tanks as they arrive, as well as ongoing maintenance for the Leopard 1A5s Ukraine already has. That local support will prove vital, as it means Ukraine no longer has to reject tanks that arrive in shoddy condition. It can fix them within its own country, with the help of a German manufacturer, to get them onto the front lines quicker. In short, Germany spent 19 months getting its act together. But it's now finally ready to make massive deliveries. Ukraine has already received 58 Leopard 1A5s, another 77 are waiting in the wings, and are due to be shipped out during the first few months of 2025. Right now, Ukraine has enough of the tanks to equip around 2 of its battalions, with the full set putting it in a position to equip almost 5 battalions. So it's been a long and arduous road to get the Leopard 1A5 into Ukraine in significant enough numbers that they can cause some damage to Russia. Now we come to another question. Why will this tank be such a game changer for Ukraine? It's an interesting question to ask, seeing as the Leopard 1 is an older tank. The first model was built in 1965, meaning it's about as old as the Soviet-era tanks that Russia's been criticized for using during the war, though the 1A5 variant was built during the 1980s. Still, as the tank's manufacturer KNDS points out, the Leopard 1 is still up to date and capable of serving a purpose in the war. The different variations of the tank are still used in 9 countries across 5 continents, with the tank also being somewhat modular in its design. KNDS says that user nations also have a wide array of retrofit kits at their disposal to adjust product configurations, which is a fancy way of saying that equipment exists to allow users to upgrade the tanks to modern standards. Honing in on the Leopard 1A5, the tank's main weapon is its 105mm Royal Ordnance L7A3 rifled gun. Capable of firing all standard 105mm rounds, meaning it can be restocked using ammo from several Ukrainian partners including the US, UK and France, the gun has a semi-automatic loading system. The tank can carry 60 of these 105mm rounds, 18 in its turret and another 42 in the hull. Add to that a 7.62mm machine gun mounted to the right of the L7A3, with 5,500 rounds being carried in the tank, and 4 76mm smoke grenade dischargers mounted on each side of the turret, and you get some impressive offensive and defensive capabilities. Each Leopard 1A5 is crewed by 4 people, a commander, gunner, loader, and driver, with the tank's armor ranging from 1.96 to 2.75 inches thick, depending on whether you're looking at the hull or the turret. This thin armor is perhaps the tank's biggest weakness, as a couple of inches isn't enough to stop the most modern anti-tank weapons from penetrating the Leopard 1A5's hull. However, it's possible to bolt additional panels onto the tank to increase its armor thickness and improve its defensive capabilities. The Leopard 1A5 makes up for these armor deficiencies with impressive agility. It has a 10-cylinder, multi-fuel engine capable of generating 830 brake horsepower, allowing it to hit speeds of up to 40.3 miles per hour. It also has impressive range, as it's capable of traveling up to 279 miles cross-country before needing to refuel. That range increases to 372 miles if the tank can stick to roads. Add a solid suspension system and the ability to ford up to 7.3 feet of water with the proper preparation, and you get a tank capable of traversing most of the battered Ukrainian landscape. Guarding over all of this is an automatic fire detection and extinguishing system, and a Zeiss thermal imaging system for use during nighttime warfare to get a tank that is among the most versatile in Ukraine's arsenal. There are also upgrades to consider. Many of the Leopard 1A5s Ukraine is set to receive come from Danish stocks of the tank that its peacekeepers used in Bosnia and Croatia during the 90s. Those tanks were in service until mid-2000s and underwent several upgrades to ensure they could keep pace with modern tank developments. These upgrades included Danish investment into new diesel engines, more modern fire control systems, and newer sensor systems. The Leopard 1A5s Ukraine is receiving also have more advanced gun stabilization, making their 105mm cannons more powerful and accurate, and the bolt-on polycarbonate armor we mentioned earlier. So we see that the Leopard 1A5 trades protection for agility and deadly firepower. That makes it an interesting option for Ukraine to have on the battlefield. As Armored Warfare points out, the tank's relatively light weight of just 88,184 pounds, combined with its powerful engine, pushes its speed and maneuverability to the point where it moves like a light tank rather than a main battle tank. It's not quite quick enough to keep up with modern armored fighting vehicles, but it can give them a run for their money and is more than fast enough to chase down or escape from most of the Russian tanks it would likely encounter on the battlefield. Speaking of Russian tanks, just how does the Leopard 1A5 stack up against the heavy machinery Putin's forces field? Pretty well, as it turns out. Granted, it falls well behind many of Russia's main battle tanks when it comes to protection. For instance, Russia's T-72s have up to 24 inches of armor at their thickest, around 10 times that of the Leopard 1A5, making them more than capable of taking hits. However, modern anti-tank weapons are at the point where thick armor does little to stop a penetrative missile. Take the Javelin missiles we mentioned earlier. These missiles are fitted with tandem warheads that incorporate a pair of shaped charges. The first of these warheads initiates the reactive armor installed on many Russian tanks, forcing it to explode prematurely. That opens the door for the second penetrative warhead, which is easily capable of boring through thick Russian tank armor to unleash its explosive payload. The point we're making here is that thick armor helps a tank survive, but it's not as important in modern tank warfare as it was before the emergence of these modern counters. So the Leopard 1A5's thinner armor isn't as much of a disadvantage against Russian tanks as it may appear, especially when you add the German tank's agility into the mix. A T-72 may be able to take a heavier hit, but it may not be able to deliver an equivalent hit to a Leopard 1A5 that can circle around and avoid its turret. Then there's the Leopard's main gun to consider. This 105mm cannon shoots faster and hits hard enough to take out almost any armored vehicle the tank's operators are likely to encounter in the field. That's according to the Kyiv Post, which says, a Ukrainian crew operating the older Leopard should be able to shoot first, hit, and destroy almost all current Russian armored vehicles at any range. The only counter Russia has to this tank is its later model tanks, such as the T-90. And we already know that Russia is running out of those. It's lost 100 already and only had 67 at the beginning of the war, meaning it's burning through the few new T-90s being produced. A Leopard 1A5 might run into a T-90 on the battlefield, but it's far more likely to come across T-70 series tanks or older, with the Leopard's speed and faster firing rate giving it a clear advantage. So the 1A5's main gun can fire faster than most Russian equivalents, but that's not all. It's also equipped with lethal sabot rounds that improve its penetrative power when facing down Russian T-72s. Forbes reports that there are two types of ammunition that Ukraine really wants for its Leopard 1A5s. America's M900 and Germany's DM63 armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds. These rounds weigh 40 pounds each and contain 25mm depleted uranium or tungsten darts that are implanted into a shoe. When the round leaves the Leopard's barrel, the shoe flies off, leaving the dart to fly towards its target at speeds of up to 3,068 miles per hour. That's around Mach 4, making the round almost impossible for an opposing tank to avoid once it's been fired. These powerful dart rounds can penetrate up to 23.6 inches of solid steel. That isn't quite enough to push through the 27.5-inch hull of a Russian T-72 tank, but the turret, which maxes out at 18.7 inches, well, that's another story entirely. Ukraine's Leopard tanks would have the ability to fire these powerful sabot rounds from thousands of yards away, with their speed being such that the T-72 wouldn't have time to react before the round splits through its turret's armor. And once the sabot dart makes its way through, the tank would be done for. To understand the devastation a single one of these powerful rounds would cause, we can refer to the Ukrainian news website Sensor's description of what happened to a T-72 B3M tank when Ukraine fired a similar Russian-made sabot at its turret. That sabot, which is dubbed Mango and is reportedly weaker than the rounds Ukraine could receive from the US and Germany, reportedly pierced the T-72's hull and instantly killed the tank's gunner. Photos from the scene show a splash of blood inside the turret from where the sabot round hit, with Sensor claiming that the shot terrified other Russian tank operators so much that they ran away from their vehicles. Forbes also reports that the weaker Russian round not only killed the T-72's gunner, but also traveled deep enough into the tank to nip its commander, eventually causing him to bleed to death. Worse still for the Russian tank operators, the captured T-80 Ukraine used to fire the round was over 11,500 feet away. That underscores the weaknesses inherent to a T-72's hull. It also highlights the devastating power of even a soft and weak sabot round. If Ukraine had used the M900 or DM63 to make this shot, it's likely the round would have penetrated through the other side of the T-72's turret. This creates some interesting possibilities for the Leopard 1A5 when used on the battlefield. If it's equipped with these powerful sabot rounds, it could take advantage of its superior agility and accurate faster cannon to take out an enemy tank's gunner. That would essentially leave the tank weaponless, making it easy pickings for other armored vehicles or on-foot troops wielding javelins and rocket-propelled grenades. By now it's pretty clear why the Leopard 1A5 has the potential to be a massive game-changer for Ukraine. Yes, it's an older tank, with most having been manufactured in the 80s, but it's fast and agile, meaning it can easily evade Russia's clunkier and heavier T-72s. It also has an extremely accurate gun that fires quicker than most Russian tanks can manage, and if equipped with lethal, penetrative sabot rounds, Ukraine could use its Leopards to take out opposing tank crews while leaving the machinery itself in good enough condition to reclaim and use against the very country that built it. That's terrifying for Russia. So too is the fact that Ukraine is likely to use its new shipments of Leopard 1A5s to equip the recently formed 155th Mechanized Division, which already has Leopard 2 tanks, along with several others of the 12 heavy brigades it created toward the end of 2024. Each of those brigades typically has a tank battalion containing 31 tanks. With at least 155 Leopard 1A5s making their way into Ukraine in the coming months, that means there should be enough to fully equip 5 of these battalions. Simply put, Ukraine's ground forces are getting stronger at a time when Russia is still struggling to account for its own massive tank losses. However, Ukraine will still have some work to do to boost its new fleet of tanks, specifically when it comes to its defensive capabilities. They already have polycarbonate armor panels thanks to the Danes, who used the tanks before they arrived in Ukraine. The Ukrainians will likely boost these defenses by equipping their new Leopard 1A5s with anti-drone netting and reactive armor, so they're capable of standing up to the more agile threats Russia can present to its tanks. Those defenses are already in place on the 58 Leopard 1A5s Ukraine had been receiving up to September 2024. Only 6 of those tanks have been confirmed destroyed, meaning Ukraine has the majority of them still available for use. Add another 100 or so to that stockpile, and the country now has a tank force that's capable of causing some serious damage to Russia's ground forces. The Leopard 1A5 isn't a silver bullet capable of winning the war in Ukraine, but it is an immensely useful weapon to which Ukraine has only had limited access until now. With a local repair plant and greater commitments from its allies in place, Ukraine now has a source of very effective tanks that it can use to enhance its operations throughout the country. That's the last thing Putin wants when he's trying so hard to claim more territory in the Donbass. But what do you think about the Leopard 1A5 and its arrival en masse in Ukraine? Will Ukraine get its hands on the specific types of rounds it needs to make the tanks super effective? How will Russia counter the Leopards? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out This German Weapon Brings the Russian Air Force to its Knees, or click this other video instead.